We're going to be talking about global trade fundamentals, and for more information, you can visit the site edunomicsinstitute.com to find more related lessons and topics. Okay, to start off, what is global trade? The definition of what global trade is that global trade is a movement of goods and services across international borders for commercial purposes. And why it happens is because no country can produce everything efficiently, right? Let's say if country A specializes in producing guns, it's not going to be able to produce a lot of guns and, let's say, a lot of butter at the same time, right? There's going to be some sort of trade-off. It's going to have to produce 4 guns and it can only produce like 1 pound of butter, something like that. So with global trade, you're able to have access to lower costs, specialization, and innovation. Because let's say country B is really good at making butter, so they have maybe lower production costs, and because they have special innovation for making butter and they specialize in making butter, it would make sense for country A, who is maybe better at making guns, to trade with country B with butter. So there is a lot of demand in countries for a variety of goods and services, and that's why it's important to trade, because it can be very hard for a country to be able to have lower costs, specialization, and innovation for all of those demands of all of those different kinds of goods and services. And so, like, this is a nice quote to remember it by, and it's trade allows countries to consume beyond their production possibilities, right? Sometimes they really can't produce that much or that type of good, so having trade is really, really important. So some key terms you need to associate with global trade is imports and exports. And imports is goods and services purchased from abroad from another country that you're bringing into your country. And exports are goods and services sold to foreign markets. Okay, what are exports? To explain before, the definition is that exports are goods or services produced in one country and sold to buyers in another country. So some reasons why countries export. Well, they want to earn or obtain the foreign currency. So let's say the Japanese yen is more valuable or is more helpful in terms of trade. Like they want to pay for imports using the Japanese yen because, it's more valuable to trade. Then they might do this to obtain the currency and be able to use it because it's more valuable when trading. And then another reason is it wants to expand markets beyond domestic demand, right? Let's say if, country B can produce like 2,000 servings of butter, but it only really has like 200 people that want in the country, right? It can, beyond domestic demand, since it has that capacity, it can export the butter to country A, right? Let's say, for example. And then another reason is you want to export because you want to specialize in high quality or efficient production, right? If you're trying to produce like 100 different goods, but it's like very mediocre quality that you're producing, that's not very good, right? It's always quality over quantity. So the country really wants, let's just specialize on these few things and we'll send them out and we'll make money. And so that's what exporting is, right? You want to really specialize in what you're really good at. This way you can sell it to other countries and they'll actually want to buy it because it's very good. And then one of the last reasons is that you can strengthen political and economic influence abroad, right? Let's say country A supplies country B with guns, right? So, country B, maybe if they are in the time of crisis, they really need these guns to help them fight a war, let's say, for example. So there you have your political and economic influence, right? You're supplying them with weapons. That's definitely very influential for them. Or if you're supplying them with food, you're trading wheat, you're trading potatoes, something like that. It can definitely help you strengthen your influence abroad with another country. So some examples is that the United States exports airplanes, pharmaceuticals, and tech services, right? Think about the United States in terms of like tech services. We have many big tech companies. We have Microsoft, we have OpenAI, right? We have Apple, and they're all US-based companies. So like sometimes it might not seem very obvious that, oh, we're exporting Windows, right? We are, because for other countries, they are indeed buying the software from American companies. So that's one thing the United States does, right? And Norway exports oil and fish, so we would buy our oil, our fish from Norway. And South Korea exports semiconductors and automobiles. And notice how everyone is doing different things, right? There might not be oil in, let's say, somewhere like, I don't know, like Germany, but in Norway there is a lot of oil, so that's where they're specializing. And then, so some economic effects of exporting is that it contributes positively to GDP, right? If you're able to not only sell things to people in your country, but you're able to sell things to people in other countries, that's earning your country a lot of money, right? Which is boosting your gross domestic product. They also create domestic jobs and industrial growth, right? If you have all these industries, all these jobs that are open because you suddenly need to produce a lot of butter, creates a lot of opportunities to the people in the country. And it really helps economies boost very fastly, right? Think of China, right? When China became the manufacturing giant exporting to America and all these countries, it helped China improve rapidly. And the same thing is with Germany. Just an example. Okay, moving on. What are imports? So, as we mentioned before, imports are goods or services purchased from another country and brought into the domestic economy. So, why do countries import? Well, there's a lack of resources sometimes. Like, well, we can't find oil in Japan, so Japan would need to get their oil from somewhere else. And it would also sometimes be cheaper or better for foreign alternatives. Let's say if you were to make butter in the country A, it would cost $150 per, like, 10 pounds. Let's say that. But if you made it in country B, it would be $50 per 10 pounds, right? It's cheaper to make it in that country. Therefore, it's better if you buy it from them because it just costs less. And then sometimes, access to products is not locally available, right? If you want some like tropical exotic fruit only grown in the Caribbean, you can't really get that in like London, right? So being able to import these exotic goods allows you to be open to other products and goods that are not available in your country. And sometimes you need inputs for production, right? Let's say the US, we have a lot of wood, we build a lot of houses, but we don't have that many forests in the US. So we might have to get our raw materials from somewhere like Canada, who has a lot of forests. So we import wood from Canada. So some examples are the US imports electronics from China, oil from Canada, and clothing from Vietnam, right? The US can't specialize in each one of these, but it can get it from many other places, especially with like oil. Maybe the US doesn't have that much oil, but Canada has a lot of oil. And India imports crude oil and electronics. So maybe India also imports from Canada, or India imports from Saudi Arabia, somewhere like that, right? And then France imports energy and raw materials. Notice how they all import different things, so it's different countries specializing in different things. And of course, they probably export different things, but sometimes they can also be similar, and a lot of times they are. So the economic effects are imports can lower consumer prices, right? If producing something in the US is so expensive, but if we get it from China, it's a lot cheaper, that makes your prices of you, like walking to a supermarket, the cheaper option can be something that's imported. They also offer a variety and improve the quality of life, right? You have innovations from other countries, these exotic fruits, they just sort of, spice up your life and give in more new goods to your country and to your everyday life. And high imports can reduce the demand for domestic products. So sometimes you can see a negative effect, right? Let's say, everyone loves German cars, so the US car market isn't doing that well, right? Sometimes it can get in the way of domestic companies and their domestic success. Okay. So how do we measure trade, right? We have imports and exports, but how do we know what's a good balance of trade? So the balance of trade is usually calculated as exports minus imports. So how much you're selling to other people and how much you're buying. So a trade surplus would be you're selling more than you're buying, your exports are greater than your imports, and a trade deficit would be that you're buying more than you're selling. So a favorable balance of trade happens when export exceeds imports. It means that the value of goods and services a country sells to other countries is greater than the value it buys from other countries. Right? You don't always want to be the one buying things, you want to be the one that's selling things and earning money. So why this matters is because it reflects the country's competitiveness and production capacity, right? It shows, is this country competitive on the world stage, right? If you're constantly selling things to other countries, that makes you very competitive and it puts you at a very high threshold to everyone else. But it also shows production capacity, right? Maybe you only have 50 factories in your country, but wow, this country has 5,000. That obviously means that they might have a better balance of trade because they're able to export so much more. And if you consistently have these trade deficits, it can lead to foreign debt and currency depreciation, because if you keep on buying things and no one wants to buy stuff from your country, it can really hinder your economy. So some real world examples are that Germany often runs a large trade surplus, right? Germany exports a lot of good machinery, a lot of cars to the US, and then sometimes the US has a trade deficit with consumer goods and oil because, let's be honest, maybe we'd rather get our oil from Canada because the US even gets its oil from Canada, right? So sometimes the US can't really sell its oil in that sense. So that can just be an example. But remember, a trade deficit doesn't always mean weakness. It can just mean strong domestic consumption or investment. And things can always change around. Trade agreements are treaties between countries to encourage trade by reducing barriers, harmonizing regulations, and resolving disputes. Right? So these countries agree to come together and have this trade agreement, I sell you this, you sell me this, she sells you this, or they sell you this, right? So some major examples are the World Trade Organization. It oversees global trade rules, handles trade disputes between countries, and promotes open markets. So there's 164 member nations, and it's probably one of the largest trade organizations that we have. Another one is we have ASEAN, or Asian, I don't really know how you pronounce it, but it's our regional trade bloc in Southeast Asia that promotes free trade and regional integrations among 10 countries. So, you have semiconductors flowing through, you have oil, you have fruits, you have all that stuff between countries in like the Southeast Asia, the Southeast China Sea, like around that area. Then you have NAFTA and USMCA, which is a trilateral agreement between the US, Mexico, and Canada. And so the USMCA updated NAFTA to reflect modern trade challenges. So you might have heard, with the current US government, there has recently been some updates with our trade with Mexico, with our trade with Canada. But because, those are our two neighboring countries in North America, it's a very important trade alliance for those of us in the US. And the benefits of trade agreements are that it encourages investment and economic integration, right? It allows neighboring countries to have that strong bond, invest in each other's sectors because they play a big part in what you're importing. And it overall just helps break down those borders, reduce the cost of goods flowing through these nations, and just have these consistent rules to make sure that everything is going along smoothly. Okay. Trade policy and tools. So government interventions. Here are some things that your government can use to sort of regulate, manage trade. We have tariffs, which is a tax on imported goods. So it makes imports more expensive. So it protects domestic producers. Remember our previous example of our German car manufacturers, right? If German cars are so popular in the US and domestic car companies aren't doing well, then maybe the US government can slap a tariff on German cars, making them more expensive so more Americans can buy American cars, right? But it can lead to retaliatory tariffs because maybe Germany can be like, okay, US, well, you import a lot of electronics for us, so I'm slapping a tariff on that. So German people can buy German electronics instead, right? So that can be harmful for the US and it can result in a trade war, right? And then you have quotas, which is a limit on the quantity that a certain good can be imported. So it controls the volume of competition from abroad, right? Like Mexico can be like, well, the US, you're really only allowed to give us 5,000 computers a year. Or that's just an example. It's probably not a good number. But it kind of controls that the US can't earn that much when it's exporting to Mexico. So it may lead to shortages because Mexico might not be able to get enough computers, or it might be higher because there's just less supply. So prices increase for consumers. Then you have subsidies, which is government payments to domestic industries. So it lowers production costs and boosts exports. So maybe the US is like, oh, look, our computers, our electronics they're just so well. A lot of countries want to buy them, but we just can't make enough. So I'm going to give all of you computer manufacturing companies like $10 million. You guys build your computers, build them faster, right? So it would lower production costs and boost exports. But it may distort global prices because all of a sudden the US is exporting 10 times more computers than it has. So there might be some countries who are competing, like maybe China, who's also making their computers. It can be more disruptive and more competitive. So that's something that can happen. And then embargoes are a total ban on trade with a particular country. So in the past, America has had embargoes, like this is a couple centuries ago, but embargoes on France, embargoes on Britain, especially when we were at war with them, right? Like colonists, no buying tea from England, something like that. A total ban on trade with a particular country. So it is used as a foreign policy tool, and it can harm civilians or escalate geopolitical conflict, right? It can only make the countries be mad at each other even more, and the civilians might not be able to get their tea or their wheat or whatever it is that the embargo is placed on. Okay, so here are some questions you should think through after this lesson. So what are 3 products that you use around your house that are imported? And where would you guess they're from? And where really are they from? Does global trade help or harm developing countries? Why? Should governments protect domestic industries even if it means higher prices for consumers? And how should we balance the economic benefits of trade with environmental concerns? Take a good amount of time to think over those questions after this lesson. And thank you for listening. Once again, if you want more resources, more similar lessons on similar topics or completely different topics, you can visit edunomics.institute.com.